know this too, right? So it's very important to remember that all the corollary or unintended or downstream consequences of all these chemicals. These chemicals were not designed to eradicate the bee population. They were not designed to eradicate the monarch butterfly population, but they do. The end result is that they do. So the neonicotinoid pesticides you hear about causing this bee colony collapse, the pesticides that kill milkweed, monarch butterflies basically only eat one thing. They eat milkweed. If you kill all the milkweed, the monarchs have nothing to eat. 1/3 of our food comes from bees. These neonic, as they're called, neonic pesticides, they're made in Germany by Bayer, but they're banned in Germany. But we'll use them. It's just like a lot of the pesticides made by Syngenta are illegal in Switzerland, but happily used in the United States. This neonicotinoid thing is becoming quite a hot issue right now. You'll start to see, if you haven't already, you'll start to see quite a bit of attention. One more thing, fracking. I don't know if this is a big thing in Florida. Certainly where I live, it's a huge deal. Pennsylvania is right in the middle of this whole, about fracking, the hydraulic fracturing of rock that releases all this natural gas. Now that the country is becoming energy independent, natural gas that is gotten by fracking is becoming very popular and profitable. There's something known as the Halliburton loophole, which you probably can imagine is traced back to Dick Cheney. When companies came to the Bush White House and said, we've got this new technology to release natural gas from the ground by pumping highly pressurized water and chemicals into the ground, it's going to release all this natural gas, but there may be some problems with these chemicals getting into drinking water. So Cheney convened a panel to see if this was really going to be a problem, and he picked a whole bunch of industry people to be on the panel, and the panel said, no problems, hydraulic fracturing is not, will now formally be exempt from the Clean Water Act and from the Safe Drinking Water Act. That was in 2003. What do you know? Lo and behold, a very well-known endocrine researcher, Theo Colburn, who just actually passed away, found that there are 171 fracking fluids containing 245 chemicals that harm the human hormone system. In Pennsylvania, these fluids are dumped into water used by 16 million people. But that doesn't prevent fracking companies, like one called Baker Hughes, from painting its drill bits pink and giving $100,000 to the Susan G. Komen Foundation to support breast cancer research. In 2012, 562,000 people worked in the fracking industry. This is the other thing. People only think of fracking as being a problem for people drinking water, but don't forget the people who work in this business. Think about places like North Dakota and Wyoming and Pennsylvania where this stuff is happening very large scale. Fracking workers have been found to have benzene, a proven carcinogen, in their urine. These workers are at higher risk for leukemia. The longer, the more frequently they do this, the more likely they are to get leukemia, particularly if the levels are high. This is the former dean of the Pitt School of Public Health. So, when you hear arguments about small government, about how small government is best government, this is what it looks like. So there's a fracking well. New Mexico. New Mexico has 99,000 fracking wells. How many people does it have to inspect them? So that's small government, right? That's small government. So what you get with small government is lots of happy industry people and lots of unhappy drinking water people. So with all this going on, what are we supposed to do about it? Are we supposed to change our laws? Are we supposed to shop differently? Are we supposed to overthrow the way we think about things? The EU, Canada, like I said, Scandinavia, they are all doing pretty interesting things, banning chemicals. There's something like, let's see, the last count was like 400 chemicals in American cosmetics that are illegal in Europe. That's just one industry, but 400 chemicals. The United States, these companies have so much power, you'll often hear these companies say things like, we want to consolidate all regulation at the federal level. We don't want to pass We don't want each state to pass its own versions of anti-toxic laws. Because what a headache. Wouldn't it be such a headache if we had to adhere to one set of laws in Canada, or in California, and a different set of laws in Massachusetts? Let's just have one source of laws. That's what they'll say. The reason for that, of course, is they can control legislators in Washington. There are only 535, right? 435 in one house, 100 in the other house. That's a very small number of people to deal with. And money, as you know, flows freely into Washington. In the book, What's Gotten Into Us, I spent a lot of time in the state of Maine. Fabulous place. I spent a lot of time up there. And they decided they wanted to pass a very comprehensive anti-toxic law. And industry came in there and they threw money at it and they lobbied and they lobbied and they lobbied and they lost. Because Maine doesn't have a lot of industry. So a Maine legislator listening to a lobbyist from the company and a bunch of angry moms actually decided to go with the moms. So I should tell you right now, we can talk about this in the Q&A, but the only political force that is ever going to beat these companies are angry mothers. So, that is not even, I'm not even kidding about that. That is actually and not to sound all deep about this, but the moral power of mothers seems to be the only thing that can convince somebody to turn away money. So there's actually kind of a deep history about that. It turns out women were the only people that could stop war in ancient Greece too, you know. You know what you can always say to a guy? Stop fighting or I won't have sex with you, you know. That's, you read Greek drama, Greek theater, that's what there are plays written about this, right? So women can say, enough with the breast cancer causing chemicals. And it's pretty tough to turn your back on that. So it seems to be, and Maine is the living proof of that. So California, Washington, Maine, some of these states are doing some interesting things about cosmetics, about some things like pesticides and fertilizers, some of these consumer products. What can we do as consumers? Go old school. Your grandmother didn't need synthetic chemicals, and neither do you. Rule of thumb, apples are better than Twinkies, just like you should eat real food with ingredients you can recognize. So you should consider only buying things made from materials that you can pronounce. Stainless steel cookware. You want non-stick? There's this new product in the market. It's called olive oil. Clean your kitchen, your bathroom, your laundry, your teeth, your hair, anything else that needs to be cleaned with. It's things made out of plants. If you want your house to smell like an apple pie, don't spray it. Bake an apple pie. If you use a lawn care service and they insist on using pesticides, find a different company. This will be good for the environment and all the cute things that enjoy it. Better yet, consider tearing up parts of your lawn and replacing it with native trees, shrubs, and flowers. I don't know, this has got to be an issue in Florida. Certainly in the mid-Atlantic, the loss of native plants is really quite a catastrophe. And I have a colleague named Doug Tallamy, who I'd like to recommend his book. He's an entomologist. He's written a great book called Bringing Nature Home about how you can turn your own garden into essentially a wildlife preserve. And he said if everybody took 10% of their lawns and planted native trees and native plants, you would create the greatest national wildlife refuge in the United States at no taxpayer expense. So try it. And then lastly, just because I'm an English professor, I have to do this whole thing. We need to reconsider our whole relationship with consumption and the natural world itself. So at the University of Delaware a couple of years ago, I started an entire new program called Environmental Humanities, where we study the environment but from every other point of view. We read things like spiritual writing. We read Christianity's Desert Fathers. Now, these are people who lived a long time ago in a very unwelcoming place. It turns out that their writing was deeply engaged with the natural world. Who would have thought, 3rd century Christian mystics might have something to tell us about the environment? We read Buddhist texts. I like to say it offers insight into our impulsiveness and the weird human need to seek identity and meaning in material objects. We study Taoism Greatest example of Taoism, right? I don't know if you've read the Tao Te Ching or any of the great Taoist texts, but if you think about what a river does is it goes like this, right? A river wants to do this. What does the Army Corps of Engineers do? Right? Or it builds levees. Now think about this. If you build levees up and down the Mississippi River, the Mississippi River for eternity has risen and flooded, risen and flooded, risen and flooded, up and down the entire river. If you build levees so that the river can't flood, what's going to happen when all that volume of all that water keeps going and trying to dissipate and it can't, and it finally hits a place like, I don't know, New Orleans? What happens? Right? The energy comes in like a tidal wave. So, natural systems want to do what natural systems do. The more we engineer it, the more trouble we get. So, China has more to contribute to our awareness of things than the barcode. That's my point. Richly integrated ways of being can be found in indigenous shamanic wisdom. If you've ever read a book called Black Elk Speaks, great Native American wisdom tradition, very useful thing to think about. Ecology. Aldo Leopold, I'm sure many of you know, the father of American ecology, says, "A thing is right when it tends to preserve the integrity, stability, and beauty of the biotic community. It is wrong when it tends otherwise." Written in 1948, right? 3 years after the end of World War II, 14 years before Silent Spring. And then, of course, there's the pure joy of rediscovering our beautiful watersheds and ancient ways of being in the world. So every year, I take my students, who are not science students, they're humanities students, I take them canoeing on the Susquehanna River, one of the biggest rivers. Turns out, actually, the Susquehanna is one of the 3 oldest rivers in the world. The river is so old, they think it was actually there when we had one continent. Before the continent split, the Susquehanna was there. And there is some of the oldest rock that you can find anywhere exposed along the banks. So we go canoeing. That's actually my daughter there on the left. It was she's not in college, she's 11, but just take your kids to work day, and she picked the right day to come. That's my son, he's 14. Bald eagles, right there, we sat down on a rock, had lunch with a bunch of students, and there was a bald eagle there 20 yards from us, watching us the entire time. Now, it's worth remembering that 50 years ago, because of one pesticide, DDT, bald eagles, our national bird, was virtually extinct. There are very, very few pairs anywhere in the United States. And do you know the way this happened, right? DDT gets into the food system, ends up migrating up the food chain, and by the time a bald eagle eats a contaminated fish and it goes and lays an egg, the DDT has affected its hormone system to the point that the eggshell is super thin, so the mama bird sits on the egg and the egg breaks. Right? So DDT caused the disruption in the reproductive system of eagles and osprey and great blue herons and falcons and everything else, and they came very close to going extinct. You ban DDT, and now bald eagles there's so many bald eagles now, the Baltimore Sun is now writing stories that say things like, injured bald eagles are showing up in all these bird rehab centers because there's so many of them that are starting to compete for territory. So they're fighting each other all over the place. They're nesting bald eagles everywhere in the Chesapeake Bay now. I'm guessing you'll probably find quite a few in Florida, too. That is thanks to one decision, which was to ban DDT. So those are my students having a nice day at the office. And that's me in a kayak. I've also recently, just in the last 6 months or so, started taking my students to an organic farm where we also study agriculture and teaching kids how to simply plant things. You might be surprised how few young people could tell you where a potato comes from. Where do they grow on trees, they say? And then you show them one, they'll say, that's dirty, I don't want dirt. And they're like, you say, well, So, a good question we should ask ourselves is, do you think someone should get a college degree if they don't know where a potato comes from? I had a student tell me that she had to run out of my class earlier because she had a marketing class where her final project was coming up with a marketing plan for Dunkin' Donuts. So this is, in my opinion, what an English major should be doing with some of their time. So those are the 2 most recent books. You can find them out there, I think, and if not, you can find them online. And I would be happy to take any questions that you might have. Thank you very much.